The Packlids would learn the hard way why you never ever attack Earth, even if you've just exterminated an entire human colony on an alien world. At the heavily fortified Earth Defense Force headquarters in New York City, Captain John Scott strode into the emergency briefing, his scarred face etched with the weariness of 100 battles. The usually boisterous officers fell silent as the grim-faced Joint Chiefs stood at the podium. They played the classified footage without preamble. Scott and the assembled soldiers watched in mute horror as a massive alien fleet materialized above Kepler 186f, humanity's first extrasolar colony. Enormous ships disgorged searing plasma beams, instantly incinerating the planet's surface. Hideous tentacled creatures poured from dropships, butchering the fleeing colonists with sadistic pleasure. They cruelly toyed with their victims before ripping them limb from limb. The video ended with mountains of mutilated corpses piled before the colony's smoldering ruins. Scott felt hot bile rising in his throat, his fists clenched so hard that blood dripped from his hands. The Joint Chiefs revealed that the hostile aliens, called Packlids, were now en route to Earth, determined to repeat their unspeakable atrocities on an unimaginable scale. Humanity's survival hinged on the Earth Defense Force repelling the imminent onslaught. As the briefing concluded, Captain Scott's eyes blazed with unquenchable fury. He ground out the words like shattered glass. "I don't know what the hell the Packlids are, but I know they just signed their own death warrant. Let's teach those murderous bastards what happens when you fuck with the human race." Scott marched through the EDS Retribution's gleaming corridors, his boots clanging on the polished steel deck. He entered the ship's briefing room, the assembled crew snapping to attention as their commanding officer arrived. Scott activated the room's holographic display, bringing up a star map showing Earth and the approaching Packlid fleet. "Listen up. Those Packlid bastards butchered our people on Kepler 186f, and now they're coming for Earth. Our job is to intercept them at the Oort cloud and buy time for the planet to get its defenses online. I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered and outgunned, but we're the only thing standing between the Packlids and billions of innocent lives. We will hold the line. We will make those monsters bleed for every inch of space. Am I clear?" "Sir, yes, sir," the crew shouted in unison, their faces grim with determination. The Retribution departed Earth orbit, rapidly accelerating as Scott input the coordinates for the Oort cloud. Stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewport as the ship hurtled through space at unfathomable velocities. Scott stared out at the shifting colors of hyperspace, his thoughts drifting inexorably to his childhood on humanity's first colony. He remembered racing through the settlement's hydroponic farms with his brother, their parents' laughter echoing under the twin alien suns. He remembered the night sky of Kepler 186f, impossibly clear, the Milky Way a glittering spray of diamonds across the heavens. And he remembered the day the Packlids came, when that sky rained fire and blood. Alarms blared across the bridge, jolting Scott back to the present. Proximity warnings flashed on the command console as the ship translated back into real space on the edge of the Oort cloud, and found itself face to face with an armada of Packlid warships. The crew stared in slack-jawed horror at the sheer size of the enemy fleet, thousands of vessels, each one bristling with weapons and dwarfing the Retribution like wolves surrounding a pup. The alien ships seemed to swallow the stars, their hulls drinking in the light of distant suns. "Hail them," Scott growled, his voice cold as the void outside. The comm officer opened a channel with a trembling hand. Scott forced his spine straight as the Packlid flagship appeared on the view screen, the hideous tentacled creatures leering at him with sadistic hunger. "This is Captain John Scott of the Earth Defense Force. You're trespassing in the sovereign territory of Earth and have committed an act of war against humanity. Retreat now or be destroyed." The Packlid's response was immediate and unequivocal. A storm of plasma torpedoes erupted from the alien ships, slamming into the Retribution shields with enough force to send the human crew sprawling. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as the lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness. "Return fire all batteries," Scott roared. The Retribution's weapons glowed like captured stars as they hurled streams of superheated metal at the Packlid fleet, and splashed harmlessly off their impenetrable hulls. The human ship's guns were pea-shooters against the sheer immensity of the enemy vessels. "Captain, our weapons, they're useless, they're technology. It's centuries ahead of ours," the weapons officer whispered, his voice thick with dawning horror. "We might as well be throwing rocks." Scott felt an icy hand clutch his heart as the tactical display showed the Retribution's shields already at 30% and falling fast. The enemy's power was unimaginable. Earth didn't stand a chance, unless— "Activate the Shiva device," Scott said softly. The crew turned to him in stunned disbelief. The Shiva was a city killer, a weapon so destructive it had been banned by every treaty Earth had ever signed. To even build one was unthinkable. To use it— "Sir, the Outer Space Weapon Treaty of 2241 expressly forbids," the executive officer began, but Scott cut him off with a glare that could melt steel. "I know what it does, Commander, and if we don't use it in a few hours there won't be an Earth left to sign treaties. Now activate the damn weapon. That's an order." The crew hesitated a moment longer, then moved to comply, their faces ashen. A deep hum filled the ship as a massive cannon emerged from the Retribution's prow, its barrel beginning to glow an angry, blistering red. On the bridge, a final safety prompt appeared on the weapons console. "Shiva device armed, confirm firing sequence, yes, no." Scott squeezed his eyes shut, images of mountains of butchered children on Kepler 180 flashing through his mind. When he opened them again, they blazed with the fires of hell itself. He stabbed a finger down on the console. "Yes." "But—" Scott and his crew snatched up plasma rifles and kinetic shotguns from the armory racks. They slapped in power cells and ammo drums with practiced movements, the click and snap of loading weapons loud in the confined space. "Listen up," Scott shouted over the din. "We hold the line right here. Don't let a single one of those bastards through." The ship shuddered as Pakled breaching pods punched through the hull. The scream of shearing metal reverberated through the corridors. Thunderous booms echoed as the pods disgorged their deadly cargo. Private Hawkins, a baby-faced recruit, looked to Scott with wide eyes. His knuckles were white on his rifle grip. "Captain, how many of them are there?" "Enough to kill us all," Scott said grimly. "So let's even the odds." Howls and shrieks echoed through the ship as the Pakled boarding parties advanced. The sounds of nightmares made real. They smashed through sealed bulkheads like tissue paper, leaving ragged holes ringed with torn metal. The humans crouched behind hastily erected barricades of overturned tables and equipment crates. They sighted down their weapons with the steadiness that only came with accepting one's own death. "Steady," Scott breathed as the sounds grew louder, closer. Hideous shadows danced on the walls cast by the strobing emergency lights. "Steady." A clawed hand punched through the final door. Pakled soldiers began tearing the steel apart, peeling it back like foil to reveal a mass of writhing tentacles and gnashing teeth. "Fire!" Scott roared. The humans opened up as one, pouring streams of incandescent plasma bolts and hypersonic metal slugs into the breach. The air crackled with the stench of ozone and cordite. The lead Pakled jerked and spasmed as the fusillade tore its body apart. Ichor splattered the walls. But more surged forward, trampling their fallen comrade. They returned fire with their own weapons, filling the corridor with sizzling energy beams. Humans screamed as the shots boiled through armor and flesh. "Keep firing!" Scott yelled, hoses of blood spraying from his soldiers as they fell. "Don't let them through!" The Pakleds pushed forward, heedless of losses, simply absorbing the humans' fire with their sheer numbers. For every alien that fell, 5 more charged over the corpse. The defensive line collapsed into brutal close-quarters combat. Men and aliens grappled in a whirlwind of slashing talons and thrusting blades. Screams and roars filled the air, barely audible over the ceaseless bark of gunfire. Scott smashed his rifle butt into a Pakled's skull, the creature's exoskeleton shattering like a lobster shell. He spun and drilled a burst of plasma into another alien's gut at point-blank range. The smell of charred flesh stung his nostrils. "Fall back," he shouted over the carnage, firing until his rifle's power cell ran dry. "Fall back to the engineering deck." The ragged survivors of the EDF crew broke contact, sprinting deeper into the ship as the Pakleds howled in pursuit. Rifle shots and alien shrieks dogged their heels. Scott reached the blast door to engineering and frantically typed in his override code. The massive door ground open and the humans piled through. Just as Scott crossed the threshold, a plasma bolt sizzled past his head and struck the door's control panel. It exploded in a shower of sparks, and the door ground to a halt, still partially open. Pakleds began pouring into the gap, hissing and snarling. The humans brought their guns to bear, only to hear the click of empty magazines. "Shit, I'm out!" Hawkins cried, fumbling for another ammo drum that wasn't there. "Me too," another soldier shouted. The Pakleds surged forward, smelling blood. Jagged teeth gleamed in the darkness. Scott drew his kinetic sidearm and unloaded into the mass of aliens. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber as the Pakleds closed in, their claws reaching for him. Scott's kinetic sidearm clicked empty. He hurled it at the closest Pakled, the heavy pistol caving in the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. His hands blurred as he drew a gleaming combat knife from his boot, burying it to the hilt in a Pakled's eye socket. He ripped it free in a spray of ichor, whirling to slash another alien's throat. His crew fought like demons, making the Pakleds pay for every step in blood. Private Hawkins emptied his shotgun into a charging alien, blasting it off its feet. He reversed his grip and used the gun like a club, smashing Pakled skulls until the weapon snapped in half. Plasma fire lit the darkness as a Pakled leveled its rifle at Hawkins's back. Scott dove, shoving the private aside. Searing agony exploded in his chest as the plasma bolt meant for Hawkins burned through his armor. Scott hit the deck hard, gasping as he felt his ribs shatter. He forced himself to his feet, lungs searing as he hurled himself back into the melee. One by one his crew fell. Hawkins, Nguyen Ivanovich, each one fighting to their last breath, dragged down under a tide of hissing, clawing nightmares. Until only Scott remained, alone in a circle of Pakled dead. His armor was shredded, his body a map of charred plasma wounds and bleeding gashes. He could barely lift his knife, his arms leaden, shaking with fatigue. The Pakleds drew back, warbling to each other in their guttural language. They parted ranks as a massive alien strode forward, its armor covered in grisly trophies. The Pakled commander. It towered over Scott, its eyes glinting with cruel amusement as it drew a serrated blade as long as a man's arm. Scott met its gaze, baring his teeth in a rictus grin. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "See you in hell," he growled. His hand closed around the detonator on his belt. The Pakled hissed, raising its blade. Scott pressed the detonator, and the universe went white. For a fraction of a second, the retribution blazed brighter than a supernova, as the ship's scuttling charges immolated it from within. Pakled ships fused to the hull vanished instantly, reduced to atoms. The dying ship became a funeral pyre, an offering of flame to avenge the fallen. Sensors on the EDF flagship Artemis flared as they registered the detonation. Admiral Cole stared at the readout, her face a mask of grief. The Retribution's destruction could only mean one thing. But Scott's sacrifice had given them a priceless gift, the Pakled fleet's location. Cole's eyes hardened as she turned to her crew. "Singularity torpedoes, full spread. I want those bastards dead." The Artemis shuddered as a salvo of torpedoes leapt from its tubes, space-time warping around the antimatter warheads. They detonated in the heart of the Pakled fleet, gravitational shear ripping ships to component atoms. The aliens returned fire instantly, a storm of plasma bolts and disruptor beams that tore through the human ships like tissue. A third of the EDF fleet vanished in the first seconds, consumed by fire. But the humans gave as good as they got. Beams and torpedoes crisscrossed the void as the fleets dueled at knife fight range. Ships wheeled and dove, stabbing at each other with lances of incandescent destruction. Miniature suns flared and died between Earth and Luna as vessels ruptured and exploded. The orbital defense platforms, massive railgun emplacements bristling with missile pods, fired non-stop into the maelstrom. Solid tungsten slugs, moving at significant fractions of light speed, punched through Pakled shields to impale ships like bullets through flesh. Nuclear-tipped rockets swarmed from launch silos to rip open enemy hulls. Slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The sheer weight of Earth's defenses and the ferocity of its ships began to tell. Pakled vessels fell out of formation, belching atmosphere from rents in their hulls. Their return fire slackened as human weapons found weak points, tearing through armor to savage vital systems. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The remaining Pakled ships leapt for hyperspace, fleeing the system in disarray as the battered remnants of the EDF harried them like wolves, culling stragglers from the herd. Silence descended as the last alien vessel vanished into the void. The EDF ships limped back to orbit, trailing debris and flickering with damage. Shattered hulks tumbled, bearing mute witness to the toll of victory. Earth had survived, but at a terrible cost. 3/4 of the fleet gone, billions dead on Mars, the planet's cities blasted to rubble, its atmosphere choked with ash. And Captain John Scott, the hero who gave everything to buy Earth its chance, lost with all hands aboard the Retribution. The people of Earth gathered around vid screens and holoprojectors, their faces haggard, eyes haunted by the slaughter they'd witnessed. The High Marshal of the EDF appeared, his uniform torn and stained, face streaked with soot. "We have won a great victory today," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow and rage in equal measure. "But this is only the beginning. The Pakleds have sown the wind, and now they shall reap the whirlwind." In shipyards and orbital foundries, construction drones swarmed over the skeletons of new warships, their skeletal frames gleaming in the sun. In training camps across the planet, armies of grim-faced recruits shouldered plasma rifles and grav guns, their boots thundering in perfect unison. Earth knew now it was not alone in the universe, and it knew that its survival hinged on the cold equations of force. The Pakleds had made a fatal error. They'd taught humanity how to hate. "We will take this war to the enemy," the High Marshal roared. "We will have our revenge. Let the galaxy burn before we yield." As one, the people of Earth took up the cry, their voices shaking the very heavens. Never attack Earth. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.